When the elderly man muttered something in French from his hospital bed, the nurse smiled. "He's rambling again," she said. But the woman in the corner froze. Because those words weren't rambling. They were death warrants from Nazi-occupied France 80 years ago, and everyone who knew these codes was already dead. Or so they thought. The ordinary-looking grandmother shot to her feet. Her book hit the floor. For the first time in 40 years, her real identity was about to be exposed, because there was a World War II expert in that room, and what she had just heard was one of history's greatest secrets. Welcome to Hidden Legends. Tell us in the comments which city you're watching from today, and if you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because when you learn this woman's true identity, you'll understand why she hid for 40 years. Everyone at Riverside Nursing Home knew her as the Book Lady, but that was a false identity. Marguerite Dubois, 85 years old, she came every Tuesday and Thursday to read stories to the elderly, blue eyes behind a gentle smile, an ordinary grandmother, or so it appeared. For 40 years, no one knew who she really was, not even her husband, because those words heard in that hospital room, only 3 people had ever known them. 2 had already died by Nazi bullets. The third was standing right in front of you. But if Dr. Sarah Chen hadn't been there that day, this secret would have been buried forever. Dr. Sarah Chen was a retired World War II historian from Stanford. When she came to visit her mother that day, she had no idea she was about to make the discovery of a lifetime. She heard Marguerite's voice, reading French stories to the elderly man. But what caught Dr. Chen's attention was different. This accent was from the 1940s, and when the man muttered those French words, Dr. Chen's blood ran cold, because those words were code phrases kept secret in Klaus Barbie's Gestapo archives, operational codes from the Lyon resistance cell in 1943. But this was impossible. Everyone who knew these codes was dead, yet Marguerite was responding with perfect French code phrases. Marguerite shot up. Her book fell. 40 years of silence cracked in an instant. "Albert, no," she whispered. "You're safe here." But Albert's mind was 80 years in the past, talking about German patrols, bridge sabotage, and that's when Marguerite realized Dr. Chen's eyes were on her. Dr. Chen fought to keep from screaming. This woman wasn't just a volunteer. This woman was the Ghost of Lyon, the legendary resistance fighter that Nazi Germany hunted for 4 years but could never catch. And now, after 40 years, she had finally been found. When Marguerite turned around, she found Dr. Chen standing in the doorway, mouth open in shock. "You ... Dr. Chen's voice trembled. "You know those words." Marguerite quietly collected her book. "What words are you talking about?" "The Lyon resistance code words, 1943, the ones Barbie's Gestapo was hunting for." Marguerite stopped. The mask she had worn for 40 years began to crack. Dr. Chen stepped closer. "I'm a World War II specialist. I've researched the French resistance for 20 years. Those words, only 3 people knew them. 2 were killed. The third disappeared," Marguerite finished quietly. Are you her? The Ghost of Lyon?" Marguerite slowly sat down. 40 years of silence was ending. "I haven't heard that name in a very long time." Dr. Chen held her breath. "The Ghost of Lyon, a legendary figure. Joined the resistance at 17, led her own cell at 19. The woman the Germans could never catch. But you, in the reports, you were 19 years old. I was 19 in 1943. I'm 85 now." Marguerite's eyes drifted to distant memories. "You forget how young we were. We were children playing with death." Dr. Chen's hands were shaking. Are you really her? The one who rescued 3 friends from Montluc Prison, who blew up Belleville Bridge?" Marguerite nodded quietly. "And much more. But those stories should stay buried." "No," Dr. Chen stood up. "These stories need to be told. You're a hero." "I'm just someone who survived," Marguerite said calmly. "Much braver people died. Their stories should be told, not mine. But Dr. Chen wouldn't give up. Over the following days, she returned with questions. And slowly, Marguerite's story emerged. In 1943, 19-year-old Marguerite Dubois was just a baker's daughter in Lyon, until the Germans took her brother to a labor camp. "They came to our house that night," Marguerite said, her eyes moist. "Pierre was only 16. They stuffed him into train cars. I never saw him again." The next day, Marguerite found the resistance, or the resistance found her. At first, they didn't trust me. I was too young, looked too innocent, but that was my advantage. German soldiers didn't suspect a young, pretty girl. Marguerite used this. My first mission was just carrying messages. But then, I started doing more. What Dr. Chen discovered next would chill her to the bone. Marguerite's transformation from innocent baker's daughter to lethal operative happened faster than anyone could imagine. "The first time I killed a German soldier, I was 19 years and 3 months old," Marguerite said, her voice steady but distant. "He was barely older than my brother Pierre. I still remember his face." It happened during her third mission. She was supposed to deliver coded messages to a safe house in the old quarter of Lyon. But when she arrived, the Gestapo was waiting. Someone had betrayed us. 3 of our people were already dead on the floor. The German soldier was searching through papers when I walked in. Marguerite had 2 choices: run and alert the Germans that she was part of the resistance, or eliminate the threat. I had a knife. My handler had insisted I carry one, but I never thought. He turned around, saw me, and for a moment we just stared at each other. He was surprised, not threatened. After all, what danger could a teenage girl pose? That hesitation cost him his life. "I learned something that day," Marguerite continued. "The war doesn't care how old you are, how innocent you look, or what your dreams were before it started. It changes you into whatever it needs you to become." Dr. Chen leaned forward, fascinated despite the darkness of the story. "How did you go from that moment to leading operations?" "Word spreads fast in the underground," Marguerite replied. "When you prove you can be relied upon in the worst situations, people notice." Within 2 months, I was running my own network of informants. The network started small: a baker who reported on German supply movements, a seamstress who overheard conversations while mending uniforms, a young priest who provided safe passage for escaped prisoners. Lyon was perfect for resistance work. The old Roman ruins provided hidden passages, the silk factories had basements that connected through the hillsides, and the Rhone River gave us escape routes the Germans never fully mapped. But the real advantage was Marguerite herself. I discovered I had a talent for reading people. I could spot a German informant from across a cafe, sense when someone was lying about their loyalties, predict how soldiers would react in different situations. My handlers called it intuition. I called it survival. Her network grew to include railroad workers who could derail supply trains, telephone operators who could intercept communications, and even a few German soldiers who had grown disillusioned with the Nazi cause. By winter of 1943, we were coordinating with 6 other resistance cells across the region. The Germans knew something was happening, but they couldn't figure out how we were always one step ahead. There were times when I was certain my luck had run out, Marguerite continued, her hands unconsciously fidgeting with her wedding ring, a nervous habit that remained from those dangerous days. One incident stood out above all others. In January 1944, Marguerite had infiltrated a German social event at the Lyon Opera House, her mission to photograph battle plans that would be displayed in the colonel's private box. I wore my best dress, spoke perfect German, and carried forged papers identifying me as the daughter of a Berlin industrialist visiting relatives in Lyon. The plan was simple: get close to the colonel, create a distraction, photograph the documents. But halfway through the evening, she recognized someone in the crowd. Henri Lafont. He had been a classmate of my brother's before the war. If he saw me and called out my real name in front of the Germans, Marguerite had to make a split-second decision. She approached Henri first. I walked up to him, smiled, and in German loudly enough for nearby officers to hear, I said, "Excuse me, you look exactly like someone I knew in Berlin. Have you ever been to Germany?" He was confused, started to respond in French, but I grabbed his arm and whispered, "If you want to live through tonight, play along. Henri, realizing the danger, played his part perfectly. He pretended to be a local businessman who had indeed traveled to Berlin on business. For 20 minutes we made small talk in a mixture of French and broken German, while I slowly maneuvered us toward the colonel's box. Henri never asked questions, never broke character. I later learned that his own father had been taken by the Germans the month before. The plan worked. Marguerite got her photographs and the intelligence helped coordinate a successful Allied bombing raid that destroyed 3 ammunition depots. Henri joined our network that very week. He said watching me work that night showed him that ordinary people could fight back. He became one of our most reliable scouts until he was caught 6 months later. Marguerite paused, the weight of old losses still heavy after all these years. The Gestapo tortured him for 3 days. He never gave up a single name from our network. He was 17 years old. Sabotage, espionage, rescue operations. The hardest was Montluc, she said quietly. 3 of my friends were there. They had fallen into Klaus Barbie's hands. Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, the Gestapo chief who tortured and killed thousands of French resistance fighters. The plan was crazy, but we had no other choice. Dr. Chen could barely breathe as Marguerite described what would become legendary among resistance historians, though, until this moment, no one knew who had actually executed it. Paul, Marie, and Jean weren't just my friends, Marguerite explained. They were the communication backbone of our entire regional network. Paul knew the radio frequencies for 6 Allied intelligence contacts. Marie had memorized the identities and locations of over 40 safe houses across southeastern France. Jean knew the timing and routes for upcoming weapons drops that would supply dozens of resistance cells. If Barbie broke them under torture, it wouldn't just mean their deaths, it would mean the collapse of resistance operations across the entire region. Hundreds of people would be exposed, captured, killed. The standard protocol was clear. When key operatives were captured, they were written off as lost. Too dangerous to rescue, too risky to even attempt. But I couldn't accept that, Marguerite said. These weren't just names on a list. Paul had helped me escape when my first safe house was raided. Marie had taught me how to forge documents so well that I could fool German officers. Jean had carried my wounded handler 3 miles through enemy territory when an operation went wrong. The rescue plan took 2 weeks to develop and required resources from 4 different resistance cells. We needed inside information about the prison layout, guard rotations, and most critically, the exact location where my friends were being held. We needed German uniforms, false paperwork that would pass detailed inspection, and a way to create enough chaos to cover our escape. What made the plan truly audacious was its core strategy. Instead of breaking into the prison, Marguerite would walk in through the front door. I would pose as a German intelligence officer from Berlin, conducting a surprise inspection of Barbie's interrogation methods. The beauty of it was that Barbie's superiors actually were concerned about his brutal techniques. There had been complaints that he was killing prisoners before extracting useful information. For the disguise to work, everything had to be perfect. Marguerite's German was flawless thanks to her mother, but she needed to master the specific vocabulary and mannerisms of a Berlin intelligence officer. We found a German deserter who had worked in intelligence before his conscience got the better of him. For 10 days, he taught me how to sit, how to speak, how to look at people the way a Nazi officer would. It was disturbing how quickly I could become someone else. Marguerite's plan was complex but brilliant. She would pose as a German collaborator and make a visit to the prison. We made fake identity papers, made me look like a Reich official. My German was perfect. My mother was a German immigrant. Dr. Chen held her breath. You went inside the prison. I didn't just go in. I spoke face-to-face with Barbie. That day, while Marguerite conducted an inspection at the prison, her friends waited outside. When the signal was given, they would create a power outage, and Marguerite would rescue the 3 prisoners in the darkness. Sitting in Barbie's office, my heart was beating so fast I was afraid he'd hear it. But the plan worked. When the power went out, Marguerite sprang into action. I had memorized the corridors. I found them even in the dark. 3 friends, Paul, Marie, and Jean, were waiting for death in their cells. When they saw me, they looked like they'd seen a ghost. "What are you doing here?" they said. "I came to take you home," I told them. The escape from Montluc was just the beginning. Marguerite's group began larger operations. When we blew up Belleville Bridge, German reinforcements were delayed for a week. That was crucial before D-Day. Each mission became more dangerous. The German soldiers knew they were tracking Marguerite. They started calling me the Ghost of Lyon. Because I always disappeared, they could never catch me. But in 1944, everything changed. There was an informant. Half our group was caught. Marguerite paused, her eyes distant. That night they raided our house, but I was on the roof, preparing for another operation. I watched them take my family, mother, father, little sister, all stuffed into train cars. I never saw them again either. When the war ended, Marguerite was 21. Her family, friends, love, all gone. I had nothing left to stay in France for. Every corner was a memory. Every street was pain. But the transition to peace was almost as traumatic as the war itself. People don't understand what happens to your mind when you've lived in survival mode for years, Marguerite explained to Dr. Chen. During the war, every decision was life or death. Every person you met could be an enemy. Every sound could mean danger. When that suddenly stops, your mind doesn't know how to stop being afraid. The first months after liberation were the hardest. I would wake up in the middle of the night, certain I heard German voices. I couldn't eat in restaurants because I needed to sit with my back to a wall, watching every person who came through the door. Loud noises made me drop to the ground instinctively, looking for cover. France was celebrating, but for people like Marguerite, the war had left invisible wounds that wouldn't heal. The government offered medals, recognition ceremonies. I declined everything. How do you celebrate survival when so many better people didn't survive? How do you accept praise for doing what needed to be done? There was another reason she avoided recognition. Fear. Not all the collaborators had been caught, not all the German sympathizers had fled. Some were still there, blending back into French society, and they knew who we were. Several resistance fighters were murdered in the months after liberation, revenge killings. The decision to leave France came after a disturbing incident in early 1946. I was walking through Lyon's old quarter when I saw him, a man who had pointed out resistance safe houses to the Gestapo. He was walking free, had probably changed his name, might have even been working for the new government. When he saw me, he smiled. Actually smiled like we shared some kind of secret. That night I realized I would never be free of the war as long as I stayed in France. The ghosts were everywhere. In 1950, she immigrated to America. A new identity, a new life. I didn't tell anyone who I was. It was too painful. The process of rebuilding herself was slow and deliberate. I chose to be ordinary. I got a job as a secretary, lived in a small apartment, went to movies and baseball games like any other American immigrant. For the first time in years, I could walk down a street without wondering who might recognize me, who might want revenge, who might be watching. For 40 years, she remained silent, tried to live a normal life. I got married. Robert was a good man. I couldn't even tell him the truth. He thought I was just a young girl who had suffered during the war in France. Robert knew there were things she couldn't talk about, but he never pushed. He would find me sometimes, sitting by the window, staring at nothing. He learned not to ask. He would just sit with me until the memory passed. He was patient in a way that saved my life all over again. After Robert died, Marguerite became even more alone. Volunteering at the nursing home was by chance. I was walking past one day and heard someone crying inside. An elderly woman was sitting alone, and something about her reminded me of my grandmother. I went in, sat with her, and somehow I started coming back. When I saw the elderly people, I remembered my own family. I wanted to care for them. It was perfect therapy for someone carrying decades of survivor's guilt. These people had lived full lives, had families, had stories. Taking care of them felt like honoring all the people who never got the chance to grow old. My friends who died in the war, they would have become grandparents too, if they had lived. Until that day when Albert began to lose his mind. Dr. Chen's discovery of Marguerite's identity caused major changes at the nursing home. At first, Dr. Chen didn't want to tell anyone, respecting Marguerite's wishes, but the elderly woman's story was too important. One day I told her, "If this story stays buried, their deaths will be in vain." Marguerite thought long and hard. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's time to speak. But the transition from hidden legend to acknowledged hero wasn't simple. First, the nursing home director learned, then the nurses, then the residents. The first person I told was Albert, Marguerite explained. During one of his lucid moments, I sat with him and said, "Those words you spoke the other day, I knew them because I was there too." He looked at me for a long time, then nodded. "I thought so," he said. "You have the eyes." It turned out Albert had his own secrets. He had been a young French soldier captured during the German invasion and had spent 2 years in a prisoner of war camp. He told me he remembered hearing whispers about the Ghost of Lyon even in the prison camp. The story gave prisoners hope that somewhere, someone was fighting back. The nursing home staff's reaction was mixed. Some were amazed, others struggled to reconcile the gentle volunteer with stories of wartime violence. One of the younger nurses asked me, "How can you be so kind to everyone here when you killed people?" I told her the truth. Because I've seen what happens when kindness disappears from the world. I spent 4 years surrounded by hate and violence. Now I choose to surround myself with care and compassion. Everyone's view of Marguerite changed. She was no longer just the book lady. She was a war hero. "But I haven't changed," Marguerite said. "I'm still the same person. I still read the same stories. Only now, people listen to her differently." The change was most noticeable in how the residents treated each other. Suddenly, everyone wanted to share their own stories. Mr. Peterson talked about serving in Korea. Mrs. Garcia spoke about fleeing Cuba. They realized that everyone carries hidden histories, hidden strengths. Dr. Chen observed something remarkable. The entire atmosphere of the nursing home shifted. People who had been withdrawn began engaging. Residents who had never spoken to each other started forming friendships based on shared experiences of resilience. But perhaps the most significant change was in Marguerite herself. For the first time in decades, I felt useful again. Not just as someone who reads books, but as someone whose experiences might help others find their own courage. Months later, Marguerite's story reached a wider audience. Local newspapers wrote about it. The History Museum interviewed her. But most importantly, the elderly residents at the nursing home began to see her differently. "Albert calls me Madame Resistance now," Marguerite said with a smile. "When he's not having episodes, of course." Dr. Chen decided to turn Marguerite's story into a book. The world needs to know these stories, especially young people. Marguerite hesitated at first, but then agreed. If this helps even one person find the courage to be brave, it's worth it. Today, Marguerite still volunteers at the nursing home. She still reads books. But now she doesn't just read stories. She tells her own story. Young people ask me, "How are you so brave?" Marguerite says. I tell them, "You're not born brave, you become brave, and courage appears when it's needed most." Behind that ordinary grandmother appearance was a woman who was light during one of history's darkest periods. "Heroes don't always wear capes," says Dr. Chen. "Sometimes they just read books and quietly work to ensure the past isn't forgotten." Marguerite's story reminds us, who knows what stories are hidden around us? Who knows what silent heroes live among us? Maybe next time you see an elderly person, it's worth asking about their story. Because sometimes the greatest legends hide behind the quietest people. If this hidden legend story touched you, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Hidden Legends with notifications on. These forgotten heroes deserve to be remembered. And tell us in the comments, have you ever met a hero hiding their identity? See you in the next Hidden Legend story.